call the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. As is always the case with the Abbott government, never take note of the names and terms they use. Think of the ones that they're hiding from view. Or in stark terms, when it comes to the Abbott government, don't focus on the smoke, focus on the reality that's about to burn you. And only the Abbott government could attempt to, in this case, with this legislation, try and create a virtue out of asset recycling, when really what they're hiding from view is the thing that they don't want you to see. Because the bill is designed to coax, some have said in this debate, bribe state governments to sell assets to get their hands on federal funds, that the government won't provide the funds on a needs basis, but rather that they'll do it only on the basis that state governments will do to their own constituencies. Because instead of being upfront and telling people this is a pro-privatisation measure, the Abbott government's turned green and embraced the concept of recycling, which isn't surprising. Since they've assumed office, they've been reusing Labor government infrastructure announcements and rebranding them as Abbott government ones. But now they're taking things further, but they're still being consistent, because not content in breaking their own promises, the Abbott government's trying to get state governments to breach faith with their own constituencies and privatise assets that those state governments did not get a mandate for. They're trying to get other governments to make unpalatable decisions on behalf of the Abbott government, like what's happening in New South Wales. And in New South Wales, we have a government now proposing to sell the poles and wires electricity assets that exist in that state. We had a previous Premier that had made numerous public comments, recent public comments, against privatisation of poles and wires of distribution in New South Wales. But a few months later, we get a new Premier, a new face, and a new redefinition of the term commitment. Now, the new Premier, Mike Baird's brandishing New South Wales Treasury analysis, suggesting that New South Wales regulated prices are higher than in the jurisdictions where poles and wires have been privatised. Yet, what that doesn't necessarily put a spotlight on, which exists in the New South Wales Treasury analysis, is that there has been a lot of investment made in New South Wales to bring ageing assets into the 21st century to ensure that they can deliver electricity in the way that modern consumers are using and demanding the supply of electricity to be at a quality that they can use. Now, what should be focused on is the work that has been done to analyse in some jurisdictions in Australia where privatisation has occurred. And for example, Sean Nichols and Brian Robins in the Sydney Morning Herald. And I have to say Brian Robins has been someone who has been following energy issues for well over a decade, so he does speak with a degree of experience and expertise. He focuses on South Australia, where after the state retail electricity market was deregulated and where there was privatisation, you had electricity bills soar almost 24%, and today South Australians are burdened with amongst the highest electricity bills on earth, ranked only behind Germany and Denmark, according to a 2012 report, and the average annual South Australian bill is now $2,335 compared with $1,960 in New South Wales and Victoria, and these are figures from the Australian Energy Regulator. So it is important to note that. And the bad news is, certainly, I think there will be some suggestions about the future of electricity pricing in New South Wales. It does, and we have to see whether or not these will bear reality, but it's certainly the electricity consumer who's the loser, no matter the ownership model. And I wouldn't necessarily be racing to embrace privatisation if you're concerned about electricity pricing, and I certainly understand the New South Wales Nationals are concerned about this, and they will rightly be concerned about this going into the election because their constituencies are rightly concerned about it. Now, why are we seeing this in New South Wales? Well, we're seeing it because, in part, the New South Wales government is having to foot the bill in part for supporting a project that some are worried will actually turn out to be a white elephant, and that is the development of Badgerys Creek Airport in Western Sydney. And importantly, this New South Wales government work is being done to support the breaking of yet another breach being made by the Prime Minister, who, you might recall, in January of 2013 said that he had absolutely no plans for a second airport at Badgerys Creek. And it didn't take him too long to commit a breach of faith with the New South Wales and the Australian people in committing to this project soon after getting into government. And what's interesting is that none of his candidates, and certainly I don't recall either the members for Macarthur or Lindsay or any of the candidates that we stood against in Western Sydney displaying pamphlets that said that they were committed to Badgerys Creek Airport. If anything, they shook their fists rightly at the notion against this airport and said that they wouldn't support it. But we have now a government saying that that's exactly what they're going to do. And the interesting thing is here that this government, making out that they're big and strong about these things, they make the decision on Badgerys Creek Airport, but they'll never mention the actual term Badgerys Creek Airport because it is such a contentious issue in our region. It's in fact, as I've dubbed elsewhere, an airport that dare not speak its name. The only time that the Prime Minister's actually ever decided to use the term Badgerys Creek Airport was when he was before the Daily Telegraph at their Champions of the West dinner. And as I have also remarked upon, talking tough about Badgerys Creek Airport in front of the Daily Telegraph is like driving an ice cream van through a sweaty neighbourhood. It's not the hardest job in the world, particularly for the Daily Telegraph that's been championing it. But what was interesting on that night is that you'll get the concept, member for Gippsland. Looks like you've had a few ice creams like me. I was going to say, but certainly in terms of that evening, as I have remarked upon elsewhere again, the Prime Minister, in talking about Badgerys Creek Airport, referred to it as that he didn't want to see burden without benefit. Burden without benefit. So even the Prime Minister recognises that this is going to be a problem. Now, their idea of the benefit is to build 3 roads, which the member for Mayo has described as a Western economic project. Build 3 roads, and amazingly, you've got an economic project for Western Sydney, and yet some of the details aren't even been actually put on the table properly. For example, in some of those roads, which have to be built anyway for the South West Growth Centre that's going to house a city the size of Penrith, city the size of Canberra, I should say, 300,000 people. When you look at their program itself, one of the key ones, the new east-west motorway, at a total of $1 billion, doesn't even have an end date put to it. We're given rather loose terms or a loose commitment that says it will be completed before the airport opens in 2022. And this is exactly the type of problem that we have with infrastructure planning in this country, is that we've got these commitments loosely made and there's not much evidence to back them up. And in the case of Badgerys Creek Airport, one of the things that we're being told is the big seller here is jobs. And yet, at a meeting that the Deputy Prime Minister convened and then didn't show up to talk about Badgerys Creek Airport, we find out from departmental officials that the 60,000 jobs figure that's being mooted by the Prime Minister and his acolytes isn't even true. It's only going to be 5,000 because 5,000 jobs flows from a single runway airport that's going to exist at Badgerys. And so, frankly, we are being made commitments about big benefits that aren't in reality going to be delivered, and we are going to be worse for it. And I'll come to that in a moment. There are concerns that Badgerys will become an expensive, costly waste of taxpayers' funds. And people have looked at the situation where airports either here in Australia, second airports have been built in a jurisdiction, or are overseas. Here, Avalon Airport is struggling to exist. It was opened with much fanfare, had a lot of retail presence there. I'm now led to believe that all it's got is a food and coffee outlet. Qantas has reduced its presence there, and Avalon's only been able to assume 1.7% of air traffic from Tullamarine. And so there are concerns about Avalon. If you look overseas in Canada, Maribel Airport near Montreal built, promised that it would be the airport to carry the load from the other airport that existed in Montreal, built in the 70s. It's turned out to be an airport no one wants to use. It's 50 kilometres north of Montreal and rivals Dorval Airport, an airport that was only 20 k's from the centre of Montreal. And Mirabel, in an article that Ian Higgins wrote for The Australian in 9 May, says that Mirabel's died a slow, drawn-out death as a passenger airport. Yet we're going to commit billions of dollars to Badgerys. Billions, absolute billions. And you look at other parts of the world, for example, the Ciudad Real Central Airport, previously known as the Don Quixote Airport in South Madrid. They're both now ghost airports. They are airports that are not delivering, and yet we've committed billions of dollars to these airports. And it's now prompted analysts here in Australia, for example, a transport and infrastructure analyst with Deutsche Bank, Cameron McDonald, saying the federal government's plans for Badgerys are pretty vague. The analyst goes on to say, Cameron McDonald, we don't even know what sort of airport's going to be built. And they're concerned that the question is, I question some of the numbers, how do you make billions of dollars investing in Badgerys? Even if Badgerys Creek did better, McDonald said, and got about 2% of Kingsford Smith's 38 million passengers, that equated to about 760,000 passengers a year. You put up, this is his words, say $1.5 billion for a runway and a basic terminal, it's not going to be a very lucrative business. So my issue is we've been given infrastructure, not the stuff that the Western Sydney wants, it's the stuff that the east of the Sydney needs to see happen. And we're told we're getting it because we want it. And it's based on community research, and this is intriguing, Deputy Speaker, it's based on community research that Labor did, that we did when we were in government. Now, a number of MPs from Western Sydney, me included, asked then Prime Minister Gillard how you could conduct community research on a project that we didn't support and was party policy not to. We still did it anyway. And then, surprise, surprise, the federal government has received, the federal Abbott government has got its hands on documents that were part of a cabinet process some time later. And questions have to be asked. How did the Abbott government get that material, and how is it relying upon it? And the fact of the matter is, I think that is a serious breach of cabinet process. And I think there need to be questions asked as to how the Abbott government has just felt free to use this material. So, as I come back to the point, we are committing billions on a project that is going to suck up dollars that won't be available for other things that Western Sydney needs. Those opposite, cutting health infrastructure spending for things that we need, we can't get that, but we get an airport. And if you ask any other Western Sydney resident if they, on their list of infrastructure needs, what they should actually be getting, they will not be asking for an airport because they do not believe that it's in the interests of Western Sydney residents to get that airport when they've got other infrastructure needs. And no one has had a serious look, for instance, at unshackling the existing investment around Sydney Airport. For instance, Sydney Airport, the flight movements that have been restricted for quite some time, no one is seriously looking at. No one is seriously looking at, for example, lifting the movements per hour from 80 to 85. Now, one of the arguments is, well, that the roads around the airport won't allow that to occur. Well, if that's the case, why have we got a federal government committing billions to roads and the other side of the city, instead of looking at what would make Sydney Airport work better by freeing the land-based transport around the airport to accommodate an increase in the availability of flights within Sydney? No one's actually looked at it, yet we're going to commit billions, and the people of Western Sydney will not actually get the infrastructure that they need. They'll get it on the basis of what others are claiming we need. And we are just going to repeat the Canadian experience of wasting billions on an asset 50 kilometres away instead of supporting what the markets want. And this is being championed not by people in our area, it's being championed by people outside them. And so again, I don't think that it's in the interest of the area. Now, there may be in time support amongst parties for this airport, but my view is I'll take the position that I'll stick up for the people of our area because I think they've been dudded for long enough, where we've been wanting to get infrastructure, where the city continues to grow, where it is not supported in terms of proper infrastructure, and then no government's prepared to, in effect, retrofit suburbs that have already been built with new infrastructure, or if that retrofit is put forward, it is again consigning infrastructure dollars in a way that will divert from the needs of people where they actually do require better infrastructure. So certainly I think this government is going to be making a series of mistakes that will be very costly, and the people of Western Sydney will be paying for it.